The Norse people had stories. These stories explained the world. They described gods and other beings. The stories were told over generations. They were part of how people understood their existence. The stories were simply there, woven into daily life. The 9 realms. The Norse cosmos was divided into realms. There were 9 of them. These realms were connected by a great tree. The tree was called Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil held the realms together. It was the structure of existence. This is what the stories said. The realms each had their nature and inhabitants. Asgard was where the gods lived. Midgard was where humans lived. These 2 realms were the most familiar in the stories. They were mentioned most often. The other realms were also important, but less central to everyday concerns. Jotunheim was the realm of giants. Giants were beings of great size and age. They were often opposed to the gods, though not always. Some giants were friendly. Some gods had relationships with giants. The boundary was not absolute. Giants represented forces of nature. They were ancient and powerful. Alfheim was the realm of light elves. Dark elves lived in Svartalfheim. The elves were lesser beings than gods, but greater than humans. They had their own nature and concerns. They appeared in some stories. They were part of the structure of the cosmos. Niflheim was a realm of ice and cold. Muspelheim was a realm of fire and heat. These were elemental realms. They represented extremes. They existed as part of the balance of the cosmos. One was cold, one was hot. Together, they represented the range of existence. Helheim was the realm of the dead. Most people went there when they died. It was not a place of punishment. It was simply where the dead resided. A goddess named Hel ruled it. She was the daughter of Loki. Helheim was below, in the roots of Yggdrasil. The dead descended there. Vanaheim was the realm of another group of gods called the Vanir. The Vanir were associated with fertility and prosperity. They were older than the Aesir, the gods who lived in Asgard. At some point, there had been conflict between the Aesir and Vanir. Eventually, they made peace. Some Vanir came to live with the Aesir. This was part of the history of the gods. These realms existed simultaneously. They were all part of one cosmos, held together by Yggdrasil. The tree's roots reached into different realms. Its branches extended into others. The tree was constant. It maintained the structure. Without it, the realms would drift apart. This was understood. Odin. Odin was the chief of the Aesir gods. He was called the All-Father. This indicated his position. He was wise. Wisdom was his primary characteristic. He sought knowledge constantly. This seeking defined much of what he did. Odin had one eye. He had given the other eye in exchange for wisdom. There was a well called Mimir's well. Drinking from it granted wisdom. But the price was an eye. Odin paid this price. He drank from the well. He gained wisdom. He lost an eye. This exchange was considered worth it. Wisdom was valuable. Odin had 2 ravens. Their names were Hugin and Munin, thought and memory. Each day, the ravens flew out across the world. They observed what happened. They returned in the evening and told Odin what they had seen. This is how Odin knew what occurred in the world. The ravens were his sources of information. Odin also had 2 wolves. They were his companions. He rode an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir. Sleipnir was the fastest horse. It could travel between realms. This was useful for Odin, who moved between realms in his seeking of knowledge. Odin was associated with poetry. He had obtained the mead of poetry through a complicated series of events. This mead granted the ability to compose poetry. Odin shared it with gods and with certain humans. Poets acknowledged Odin. They considered their skill a gift from him. When someone composed well, Odin's influence was present. Odin was also associated with warfare, though not in the same way as Thor. Odin was concerned with the strategic and fated aspects of war. He decided which warriors would die in battle. Those warriors would go to Valhalla, Odin's hall in Asgard. There, they would feast and fight until Ragnarok, the end of the world. This was their fate. Odin determined it. Warriors respected Odin. They wanted to die in battle so they could go to Valhalla. This was considered an honor. It meant one had been chosen. Dying peacefully in bed meant going to Helheim instead. That was acceptable, but it was not as glorious. The distinction mattered to warriors. Farmers and ordinary people related to Odin differently. He was distant. He was the All-Father, but he was not immediately concerned with crops or livestock. Other gods handled those matters more directly. Odin was acknowledged. He was respected. But daily prayers more often went to other gods. Thor was Odin's son. He was associated with thunder and lightning. When storms came, that was Thor's doing. He rode across the sky in a chariot pulled by goats. The sound of thunder was the sound of his chariot wheels. This is what people believed. Thor had a hammer called Mjolnir. The hammer was his primary tool and weapon. It always returned to his hand after being thrown. It could level mountains. It protected the gods and humans from giants and other threats. The hammer was powerful and reliable. It symbolized Thor's nature. Thor was strong. His strength was legendary. Stories told of him performing feats of incredible physical power. He lifted enormous weights. He defeated powerful enemies. His strength was not cunning or wisdom. It was direct, physical might. This was what Thor represented. Thor protected Midgard. He stood between humans and the forces that threatened them. Giants sometimes came from Jotunheim. They might threaten human settlements. Thor went out and confronted them. He drove them back. This was his function. He was humanity's protector. Farmers honored Thor. They relied on weather. Thunder and lightning came with rain. Rain was necessary for crops. Therefore, Thor was important to agricultural life. A farmer might pray to Thor for good weather. The prayer was simple. The request was practical. Thor was relevant to daily survival. Thor was married to Sif. Sif had golden hair. The hair was beautiful. It represented the golden grain of the harvest. Sif herself was associated with fertility and abundance. Her marriage to Thor connected the thunder god with agricultural prosperity. The relationship had symbolic meaning. Thor was more accessible than Odin. He was straightforward. He was not complicated. People understood Thor. He represented simple values: strength, protection, directness. These were comprehensible. They were values ordinary people could appreciate. Thor was popular because of this accessibility. Frigg was Odin's wife. She was the queen of the Aesir. She was associated with marriage and motherhood. She knew the fates of all beings, though she did not speak of what she knew. This foreknowledge was her particular gift. She saw what would come. She kept this knowledge to herself. Frigg presided over the household. Women honoured her. She represented the domestic sphere. Marriage, children, the home, these were her concerns. When a woman managed her household, Frigg's influence was present. The connection was natural. Frigg had her own hall in Asgard. It was called Fensalir. She sat there and spun clouds on her spinning wheel. This is what the stories said. The image connected her to women's work. Spinning was a common female task. Frigg's spinning gave it cosmic significance. Ordinary work reflected divine activity. Frigg tried to protect her son Baldur. Baldur was beloved by all. He was good and pure. Frigg foresaw that he would die. She went to everything in the world and made them promise not to harm Baldur. Fire promised. Iron promised. Water promised. Every substance and creature promised. She thought she had protected him completely. But she overlooked mistletoe. It seemed harmless. It was small and young. She did not bother to ask it for a promise. This was her error. Loki discovered this oversight. He used it. Baldur was killed by mistletoe. Frigg's knowledge had not been enough. She could not prevent what she foresaw. This story illustrated limits. Even gods had limits. Frigg knew fates, but could not always change them. She tried to protect her son, but failed. The story was sad, but it reflected reality. Parents try to protect children. Sometimes they cannot. This was understood. The myth reflected this understanding. Frey and Freyja. Frey was a god of fertility and prosperity. He was one of the Vanir, who came to live with the Aesir. He brought blessings of good harvests. He brought peace and abundance. Farmers honoured Frey. They asked for his blessing on their fields and livestock. Frey's favour meant prosperity. His disfavour meant poor harvests. Frey had a ship called Skidbladnir. The ship could sail anywhere. It could also be folded up and carried in a pocket when not needed. This was a magical property. The ship was useful. It represented Frey's ability to travel and to bring blessings wherever he went. Frey also had a boar with golden bristles. The boar was named Gullinbursti. It could run through air and water as easily as on land. Its bristles glowed in the dark. The boar pulled Frey's chariot. It was a symbol of his wealth and power. Freyja was Frey's sister. She was also one of the Vanir. She was associated with love and beauty. She was also associated with magic, particularly a type of magic called Seda. Seda involved prophecy and influencing fate. It was considered women's magic. Freyja was skilled in it. She even taught Odin some of its practices. Freyja had a necklace called Brisingamen. It was beautiful beyond description. She obtained it from dwarves. The dwarves had made it. She wanted it. She agreed to their terms to acquire it. The necklace was precious to her. It symbolized her beauty and desirability. Half of the warriors who died in battle went to Freyja's hall, Folkvanga. The other half went to Odin's Valhalla. Freyja chose first. This indicated her importance. She was not subordinate to Odin in this matter. She had her own domain and her own rights to the honoured dead. Women called on Freyja in matters of love. They sought her help in attracting partners. They sought her blessing on relationships. Freya understood desire and attraction. These were her domains. She could influence them. Therefore, prayers to her made sense. Both Frey and Freya represented life's abundance. Fertility, prosperity, love, beauty. These were life-affirming forces. The Vanir gods, including Frey and Freya, brought these blessings. They balanced the Aesir's focus on wisdom and warfare. Together, the two groups of gods covered all aspects of existence. Loki. Loki was a complex figure. He lived among the gods. He was present at their gatherings, but he was not fully one of them. His origins were different. His mother was a goddess, but his father was a giant. This mixed heritage defined him. He was between categories. Loki was clever. His intelligence was his primary characteristic. He solved problems through cunning. When the gods had difficulties, Loki often found solutions. His solutions were sometimes unconventional. They worked, but they came with complications. This was Loki's pattern. Loki was a shapeshifter. He could change his form. He became animals. He became other people. He even became a woman on one occasion. This ability to change was part of his nature. He was not fixed. He was fluid. This made him unpredictable. Loki caused problems. His actions sometimes created difficulties for the gods. He was mischievous. He played tricks. Some tricks were harmless. Others had serious consequences. The gods tolerated this because Loki also helped them. His assistance outweighed his troublemaking, at least initially. Loki was the father of several important beings. With a giantess, he had 3 children. Fenrir, the wolf, Jormungandr, the serpent, and Hel, who ruled the dead. These children were powerful and dangerous. The gods dealt with them in various ways. Fenrir was bound. Jormungandr was thrown into the ocean. Hel was given rulership of the dead. Loki's children were significant in the cosmic order. Loki's relationship with the gods deteriorated over time. The final break came with Baldur's death. Loki arranged Baldur's death through deception. He exploited Frigg's oversight about mistletoe. When the gods discovered his role, they were furious. They captured Loki. They bound him under the earth. Venom dripped on his face from a serpent above him. His wife Sigyn sat with him, catching the venom in a bowl. When she emptied the bowl, venom fell on Loki's face. His writhing in pain caused earthquakes. This was his punishment. He would remain bound until Ragnarok. Loki represented disorder. In a cosmos that sought order, Loki introduced chaos. He was necessary in some ways. His cleverness solved problems. But he was also dangerous. He could not be fully trusted. This ambiguity was central to his character. The stories reflected this. Loki was neither fully good nor fully evil. He was complicated. He was everyday significance. These gods and stories were part of Norse life. They were not abstract theology. They were practical frameworks. The gods explained natural phenomena. They provided guidance for behavior. They offered comfort and hope. When thunder rolled across the sky, people thought of Thor. He was out there, protecting them. The thunder was the sound of his chariot. This gave meaning to the sound. It was not random. It was Thor's presence. When crops grew well, people thanked Frey. His blessing was upon them. When crops failed, Perhaps Frey's favor had been withdrawn, or perhaps circumstances beyond divine control had intervened. The relationship with the gods was not mechanical. It was more complex. But the gods remained the framework for understanding. When someone showed wisdom, Odin's influence was acknowledged. When someone showed strength, Thor's nature was reflected. When someone fell in love, Freyja was present. The gods provided language for human experiences. They gave those experiences meaning. Rituals honored the gods. Sacrifices were made. Animals were offered. The meat was then eaten by the participants. The sacrifice was both religious and practical. It honored the gods and provided food. The combination was natural. Religion and daily life were not separate. They were intertwined. Seasonal festivals marked the year. These festivals honored gods and celebrated transitions. The beginning of winter. The return of spring. These moments were significant. They affected survival. Honoring the gods at these times made sense. The gods controlled or influenced these transitions. Proper ritual maintained good relationships with them. Oaths were sworn in the gods' names. An oath sworn by Thor or by Odin was serious. Breaking it was not just a social offense. It was an offense against the gods themselves. This gave weight to promises. The gods, as witnesses, made agreements binding. Names incorporated gods' names. A child might be named Thorstein, Thor's stone. Another might be named Astrid, divine beauty. The names connected individuals to the divine. They invoked the god's presence in a person's identity. This was common practice. Places were named for gods. A field might be called Frey's field. A grove might be Thor's grove. These names indicated that the location had some association with the god. Perhaps rituals occurred there. Perhaps the god's presence was particularly felt there. The landscape itself referenced the divine. Stories were told in the evening. Families gathered. Someone recited the myths. Children learned them this way. The stories were entertainment. They were also education. They transmitted culture. They taught values. They explained the world. The stories served multiple purposes simultaneously. The myths acknowledged that the world would end. Ragnarok was the final battle. The gods would fight the forces of chaos. Many would die, including Odin and Thor. The world would burn and sink into the sea. But afterward, the world would rise again. A few gods would survive. 2 humans would survive, hidden in Yggdrasil. They would repopulate the earth. Life would continue in a new form. This acknowledgement of ending was unusual. Many mythologies envision eternal divine rule. The Norse myths were different. They accepted that all things, even gods, have limits. They accepted that order will eventually succumb to chaos. But they also believed in renewal. After ending comes beginning. This cycle was natural. It was how things were. This perspective affected how Norse people viewed life. Courage mattered because the end was certain. One could not avoid fate, but one could face it with dignity. Heroes in stories did not win forever. They won for now. They faced their doom when it came. This was admirable. This was how one should live. Ordinary people were not heroes. but they could live with the same principles. Face what comes. Do what is required. Accept what cannot be changed. These were practical values. They helped people endure difficult lives, the harsh climate, the constant struggle for survival, the uncertainty of existence. The myths and gods provided a framework for enduring these realities. The ordinary nature of the divine. The Norse gods were not perfect. They made mistakes. Odin sacrificed his eye, but still could not prevent Ragnarok. Frigg tried to save Baldur and failed. Thor was tricked on occasion. Loki's cleverness turned destructive. The gods had limitations. They had flaws. This made them more relatable than distant, perfect deities might be. The gods needed humans. They protected Midgard, but they also needed human worship. The relationship was reciprocal. Humans needed divine blessing. Gods needed human acknowledgement. This mutual need created a bond. The relationship had balance. The cosmos itself had balance. 9 realms, each with its nature. Light and dark. Fire and ice. Gods and giants. Order and chaos. Everything had its place. Everything had its opposite. The balance was maintained through constant interaction. This reflected the Norse understanding of existence. Nothing was simple. Everything was part of a larger pattern. Daily life reflected cosmic patterns. The household was like a realm. The father was like Odin. The mother was like Frigg. Children had their roles. Servants or slaves had theirs. The structure of the home mirrored the structure of the cosmos. This was understood implicitly. It did not need to be stated. It was simply how things were organized. Work reflected divine activity. The farmer ploughing his field participated in Frey's domain. The smith at his forge participated in the work of dwarves and gods who made magical items. The woman spinning participated in Frigg's cosmic spinning. Ordinary work had meaning. It connected to something larger. This gave dignity to labor. Conclusion. The Norse myths were stories. They described gods and realms. They explained origins and endings. They provided meaning to existence. The myths were told and retold. They were sung in poetry. They were carved on stones. They were part of the culture's fabric. For the Norse people, these were not just stories. They were descriptions of reality. The gods existed. The realms existed. Yggdrasil held everything together. This was the structure of the world. One lived within this structure. One acknowledged it. One honored it through proper practice. The gods represented forces and values. Odin was wisdom and fate. Thor was strength and protection. Frigg was household and foreknowledge. Frey was fertility. Freyja was love. Loki was cunning and chaos. Each had their place. Each had their function. Together, they formed a complete system. People related to the gods according to their needs. A farmer prayed to Frey and Thor. A warrior honored Odin and Thor. A woman honored Frigg and Freya. A poet honored Odin. The relationships were practical. They addressed real concerns. They provided real comfort. The myths continue to exist as stories. The gods are no longer worshipped in the same way. But the myths remain. They are still told. They still convey something meaningful. They still describe patterns that feel true. The balance of order and chaos, the acceptance of limits, the dignity of courage, the value of wisdom. These themes transcend their original context. They remain relevant. The myths endure. This concludes the narration.